Good morning. Welcome to the inaugural NCS Fest. Hopefully this is the first of many. My name is Steve McGarry. I'm the director of this thing. So if it goes really well, you can thank me. And if it goes really badly, it was his fault. We have a distinguished panel of guests today to tell us about the story of Popeye. So, in order, I'd like to welcome our guests. Our first guest is Peter Maresca, who's a historian and publisher. And I should let you introduce yourselves. So, you've got microphones, haven't you? So, Peter, you've met. Jerry, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Jerry Beck. I'm an animation historian, and I love Popeye.
I'm Bobby London. I used to draw Popeye in daily newspaper strips for 6 years, a long time ago. And I've grown up with Popeye just about like everybody else. And I still love Popeye very much.
And I'm thrilled and honored to be on this panel. I'm CJ Kettler. I'm the president of King Features. We are the folks who brought Popeye to syndication. Wow. We continue to bring Popeye to fans, beloved fans, worldwide every day. Wow. Great to be here.
And so, as you probably know, this year we celebrate the 90th anniversary of Popeye. But what we don't stress, and we should, is that it's the 100th anniversary of olive oil. So there's your first fact: Popeye likes older women. The creator of Popeye was a gentleman called Elsie Segar, and I think I'd like to hand over now to Peter to tell us a little bit about Segar and how Popeye came to be. Peter.
As most of you were introduced to Popeye as I was, through cartoons on television. Well, maybe some of the younger ones got the comic book first, but I first remember Popeye as a movie, as cartoons that we showed on television that were actually in the theaters in the 30s. But Segar started his whole history of working in art is closely tied to the cinema. That's actually Segar's daughter. They lived in Santa Monica for a good part of his life. And that was the Christmas time, first year in Santa Monica. And that's when Segar first started at the Chicago Examiner. He was a staff cartoonist, which meant he did everything. They had sports cartoons that he had to do. If Sunday morning they needed an illustration for a text feature, he would do illustrations as well. But his first big series that was in the Examiner was Charlie Chaplin's Comic Capers. So again, he was closely connected to the cinema, working in the Charlie Chaplin comics. In fact, when he started drawing, the first drawing he had was in his hometown, where he would draw the illustrations of the slides that came up in between the features in the sound of movie film. So there was the organist, and then there was the illustrations of Segar that showed up on the screen while the organ was playing. It would advertise local merchants. And speaking of local merchants, when Segar moved to the Chicago American, which was a Hearst paper, Hearst's right-hand man, Arthur Brisbane, really wanted a way to tie in the comics to his advertising. So what he did was have Segar create, and this ran almost every day in the daily papers, ran a full column, and it would be a feature about play or a musical or a movie that was featured in a theater in Chicago. Looping the Loop, the loop refers to the elevated train that loops around Chicago, and within that loop was all of the entertainment and theaters. So they would have, the theaters would have a movie, and that movie was then made fun of or parodied by Segar in that strip. While he was at the American, the American lost a thing they had called Minute Movies by Ed Whaler. And they needed something to replace that. So they moved to Segar, who again was the big man for the movie theaters, and he'd come up with something called Thimble Theater. And he would actually make believe that each comic strip was a play, and he would have the stars of the play be his features in the comic strip. So here the woman in the play was played by Olive Oil, and the male lead was played by Anne Gravy, who within the strip, not reality of course, were boyfriend and girlfriend. And this shows the first appearance with Castor's brother Olive Oil, or with Olive Oil's brother Castor Oil, and there was the whole oil family. There was Olive Oil, Castor's wife, Cylinder Oil. They had Uncle 48. So there's a whole bunch of oil characters, and that was going on 10 years before Popeye was first introduced just as a side character. And once we got into the 1930s, a lot of the strips became more family-oriented and adventure-oriented. So what they needed was, they needed a little baby and they needed a villain. And that's why Popeye's adopted child, they weren't about to get him married because he'd be a little too domestic. But his adopted child, Sweet Pea, came out, and a standard running villain would be, of course, Bluto or Brutus, that was later done. And there's where Popeye and Olive, the vastly different looking Popeye in 1929, and when he become, that was their first kiss, and it turned out that was love forever. And the rest is history.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. And so, Jerry is now about to tell us how the Popeye animations came to be. So over to Jerry, please.
Okay, I don't know what images you'll show, but Popeye was obviously the #1 character of this early Depression era. And I think the reason, I have my own reasons for why that is, but I think it was because people could identify with the character. He was kind of sort of a downtrodden guy. He wasn't a rich millionaire. He was a person of the street, of the earth. And it was a very, very popular comic strip. And the Max Fleischer studio, one of the major animation studios, they had one line with Paramount Pictures. Max was an amazing animator who doesn't get enough credit, but he was definitely the rival, the second to Walt Disney back in those days. In the 19-teens, he had invented an invention called the rotoscope, which is a device to trace live action as an animated cartoon. It sounds strange, but that's a device that's still used today in motion picture technology. If you go see Avengers Endgame, there are some credits for rotoscope artists. This was Max invented it as a method to making animated films quicker. He could photograph his brother Dave as a clown and then transform that into drawings that looked like an animated cartoon, and they looked very realistic. That was the beginning of the Coco the Clown series of the 1920s. He did the screen songs, The Bouncing Ball, and by 1930 he had come up with a character named Betty Boop. I'm leaving all of the details of that aside, but Betty was extremely popular at the very beginning of sound cartoons, second to Mickey Mouse. Obviously Disney's Mickey Mouse was #1. The Fleischers and Paramount were looking for new characters and new ideas, and Popeye was the #1 character. They were trying out different characters as possible, new screen cartoons. Animation itself, studio animation, began with the Hearst company setting up animation studios to do Crazy Cat cartoons and Cats and Jammer Kids. So the idea of King Features and animation working together, that definitely happened at that period. They decided to make a tryout of a Popeye cartoon in one of the Betty Boop cartoons. She's introduced in one of the Betty Boop cartoons. And that was a tremendous success. And I think part of that success was not only was the character already beloved, but Seeger's characters and style fit perfectly with the craziness of the Max Fleischer studio style. The cartoons they were making already with Betty Boop and Bimbo and these other crazy characters were so surreal and different. And again, they were a New York-based studio. They were very much of the streets, as opposed to Walt Disney, who was very much of the farmyard and sunshine. The Fleischer cartoons were very earthy. and very dark in some ways, and Popeye fit with them like a hand in a glove. So, of course, one of the innovations of several that the Fleischer Studio did with Popeye was to give him a voice. What did he sound like? As you may or may not know, they found a novelty singer named Red Pepper Sam, who had this Popeye, what we call today the Popeye voice. This was a novelty voice he had done on records. And they had done that before. They'd taken other musical singers and hit singers and things like that and given them voices. The idea of doing voices for cartoons was a brand new thing in 1933, 1928, 29. There were no voice actors out there lining up to get jobs doing cartoons. Remember, Walt Disney was the voice of Mickey Mouse. They didn't go outside the studio looking for voices. The Fleischers did for this. They decided they wanted that kind of sound for this character. It worked. And again, the Fleischer humor, some of the things that were only peripheral in the comics, like spinach, were now boosted because of of things they took from the comics that they put into it. And even people who hadn't read the character in the papers fell in love with this screen version of
Jerry, should we show a clip and then they can hear Popeye
Why don't we do
in all his glory?
Who wants to watch cartoons?
It ain't me, it's him. Oh yeah, I've been getting to see the light. Must be 1,000 shots in this thing. Now so what's what? Oh no, we just got time. I get that.
It's important to remember these were made not for kids per se, they were made for the full movie-going audience back in the 30s, adults included, and who loved this. And let me mention, amongst the many trivia points I want to get out real quick, is that by 1934 through 1940, in popularity polls taken by Box Office Magazine, Popeye was the #1 character. Disney was no longer #1 when it came to short cartoons. And for decades, Popeye was the most popular character in the theaters, and then later on television during the 1960s and 70s. I want to mention the later voice of Popeye. You heard him here, Jack Mercer. Jack Mercer was one of the storymen and artists at the Fleischer Studio. He was also an ex-vaudevillian. He used to imitate the Red Pepper Sam doing the voice around the studio. The reason they had to kind of let Mr. Sam go is because he was a drinker, he was a performer, he would come in late. He wouldn't, give them what they needed when they needed it. He wasn't really a professional when it came to that. So after the first 4 or 5 cartoons with that fantastic voice, they had to replace him. Jack Mercer is unbelievable as the voice later on. Because he was one of the writers, he knew what the scripts were going to be. They actually post-recorded these cartoons, so that's why they have those wonderful mumbles, the famous Popeye mumbles under the breath. He knows what's about to come up, and he's making a joke about ad-libs. As the voice, they didn't animate to the mouth movements. They just recorded it wild, and it's one of those wonderful things that adds to the cartoon, makes them really, really, really great. Popeye was so popular; he was a great model sheet character in the early '30s. By the mid-'30s, Disney had announced he was going to make a feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which people thought was a crazy thing because the idea of seeing a cartoon like this stretched to an hour and a half was unthinkable. But Disney had bigger plans, and Snow White proved what he was trying to do. The Fleischers, though, hearing this, and Paramount, would try to beat Disney to the punch. And instead of doing full-length features, they made 3 mini-features. Popeye Meets Aladdin, Popeye Meets Alibaba, Popeye Meets Sinbad. And Popeye Meets Sinbad, the first one, got nominated for an Academy Award. They're extra-length, 16, 17-minute, full-color, Technicolor cartoons. They were gigantic hits. They were thinking of using Popeye as the star of their first feature film, Gulliver's Travels. Does everybody remember that one? Gulliver. What's interesting about Gulliver, they didn't end up using Popeye, but you'll see that Gulliver was rotoscoped. He was traced. That's that invention that I mentioned before. What do we have there? Oh, those are the specials. I am very privileged to be a consultant to Warner Home Video, Warner Archive Collection, and we are putting out, right now, we've already put out the 1930s Fleischer Classics. Right now we're restoring all of the 1940s Paramount Popeyes, which are shockingly really, really good. I say that because they have a bad rep for some reason. I don't know why. They're amazing. We just put out Volume 1. Volume 2 was just announced yesterday. We're going to announce the release date in June next week. And we hope to put out all of the 1940s and 50s cartoons on Blu-ray and DVD, and your eyes will pop when you see those. Did we want to talk about Robin Williams, as it says here? Woo! Oh, Robin, remember that? Yeah. I found it very interesting. This is a co-production of Disney and Paramount, Popeye's Old Home, and of course Disney, the leader of making live-action remakes of classic cartoons, right? I probably shouldn't say this. I love everything about this movie except the movie. I love Robert Altman. This is perfect casting. Harry Nilsson. I love his songs. I love his songs in this film. I wish it were a better movie, but it's great, and it kept Popeye alive for a whole new generation who had kind of forgotten about the character by then. So it's up to all of us on stage and in the audience to keep that character going. I think I'm gonna.
That's great. You know, to be honest with every one of these panelists, Peter Resko, Jerry Beck, Bobby London, CJ Kepler, they could do an hour on their own about these various segments. But we've got 90 years, or 100 if we're talking about Olive, so we'll push on if we may. Seagull died in 1938, I think that's correct. Yep. And the syndicate tried a number of artists to take over the strip to keep the legacy going, with varying degrees of success. But the one that they found that fit the bill
Bud Sagendorf.
Was a guy called Bud Sagendorf, who'd been, I think, Seagull's assistant, hadn't he, Peter? And Sagendorf, I think he started out doing the Dell Comics, is that right? I think it was the Dell Comics he did. And then he became he started doing the dailies and the Sundays, and he did that for many, many years. But at one point in the procedure, or in the pantheon, he stopped doing the dailies and handed over the reins, and I think it was in 1986, was it? Yeah, handed over the reins to our next guest, Bobby London, who took over the dailies, and I think he did about 6 years, but we thought it would be really interesting to hear from a Popeye artist to tell you a little bit about how he approached it, how he changed it, and how the Popeye of the 80s evolved. So, Bobby London.
Okay. First of all, thank you to King Features and Bill Morris and the Cartoon Society for bringing me back here. So I really do appreciate it. Watching that animated cartoon just brought back a lot of moving memories, because as a baby boomer from this generation, I was among the first generation to see Popeye appear on television. Before then, it was just in the newspaper strips. So my exposure to him was through Max Fleischer. My dad was an avid reader of the newspaper strip in its heyday in the 30s, and he would tell me stories about Olive's brother Castor Oil and the Sea Hag and Alice the Good and everything like that. So it really fired my imagination. And because as a young cartoonist, which I was then, I was creating my own characters a lot, but Bud Sagador's comic book was a quarterly, and it didn't arrive soon enough for me, so I would draw my own Popeye comics to fill in the gaps. And I grew up and became part of the hippie generation, the Beatles and the Yellow Submarine and the Generation Gap and all that stuff. And I joined a merry band of lunatics called the Underground Comics Movement out in San Francisco. Now, the thing about them is, as crazy as they were, they all admired and honored all the old school cartoonists from the early Hearst newspaper era, because they identified with the history of newspapers. And so a lot of the cartoons that came out of the underground have their roots in Popeye, and Dick Tracy, Barney McCool, and things like that. And I created my own character called Dirty Duck for the comic books, which was a New York style duck. He wasn't a Disney duck. He looked like he stepped out of the subway, hence his name. And that went into the National Lampoon, and then on to Playboy. And one day, I was up visiting a friend in the licensing department at King Features. They were working on an olive oil balloon or something to do with Thanksgiving Day, and they asked me for some advice on how to draw one of the characters. I think it was Popeye. I gave him a lesson on how to draw him. And I just showed them how Happy Hooligan, the old opera character, underneath all that looked a lot like Popeye and blah, blah, blah. So the word got around, and one day my phone rang, and I had a job in Disney licensing, and it was Bill Yates, who was the comics editor at King Features, and he said, "Now here, you know all about Popeye, buddy. Why don't you come up and audition?" And I did. And I was up against some pretty seasoned pros that took over, who professionally took over legacy strips, and that really wasn't my thing. My samples looked too much like E.C. Segar. I had to draw like Bud Sagador if I were to take it over. And so I did my best to make my next sample look like Bud's, who I had met while I was working at National Lampoon in 1976. His assistant on the Dell comics was a cartoonist named Randall Enos, who was also a fellow Lampooners. And he brought me over to Bud's house one day in 1976 to spend the afternoon, and I was, much to my shock and surprise, Bud told me he was a Dirty Duck fan, and we spent the afternoon talking about Segar. For some reason, which I can't get into now, he thought that my hero was George Harriman, a Crazy Cat fan, and he was in a way, but my two heroes in life were E.C. Segar and Stan Laurel. They were both my two comedy heroes as a child. And as it turns out, Stan Laurel was a Popeye comics fan. That's That's his favorite comic strip. So anyway, we talked about that stuff, and we got along great, and then went our separate ways. And during my Playboy period, after I left the Lampoon, Lampoon acquired the rights to the comic book version of the Robin Williams movie, and the publisher's daughter called me up and told her father that she wanted me to draw the comic book heavy metal version of the Popeye movie. And this was in like 1980, I think, right? That's when the film came out, right? Now I don't usually accept scripts from other guys. I like to write my own stuff. But the script was by Jules Pfeiffer, who was one of my 60s heroes, and so I couldn't turn it down. And I was ready to do it. But I left Lampoon, and Andy Simmons was angry at me for that, so he mixed the whole project, so that never happened. So fast forward back into the 80s, and I'm working at Disney, and Bill gives me the call, and I showed up, and I was finally joined kind of like Bud. The guy who, one of the other auditioners was a fellow named Warren Sattler, whose samples actually were better than mine, but he did a lot of the comic strip parodies in the Lampoon. That's what he was famous for. And he could do Charlie Brown and Blondie and all those characters. And his Popeye was pretty good, you know. But Bill was E.C. Segar was Bill's mail order cartoon course teacher, and he's very good friends with Bud, and he had an emotional vested interest in his property. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, you know, we don't want this thing to go the way of what, you know, into the tubes, and your stuff has a lot of heart. I'm going to hire you to do it, but we're turning it into a gag-a-day strip." And right away I envisioned the Comics Journal headline says, "Bobby London kills Thimble Theater," you know, because the fame of the Popeye strip was the extended storylines that would go on for months, and that's how the character, evolves out of the necessity of the stories. And I was very much into that myself as an underground guy, so I didn't want to not do the job. I was trying to sell them my own ideas, and if they had accepted one of my own strips and asked me to do that too, I would have taken it because I felt a deep responsibility to Popeye, to Segar's Popeye. I loved it so much. So I was kind of in a difficult spot, and so I came up with the idea of actually putting a storyline within the gag-a-day situation, which was that every character in the strip wanted to keep up with modern times except for Popeye. Popeye, his slogan is, "I am what I am," and so he had to stay who he was, while Olive Oyl was going punk and, like putting her hair up, and Casserole was going to singles bars, and and the Jeep was acting like Snoopy for some reason. He had a thought balloon and things like that, and they loved it. They accepted the idea. But at the same time, a fellow in licensing named Jeffrey Brown was sold a series that he thought was going to modernize Popeye, called Popeye and Son, to Hollywood. And when he saw what I was doing with it, he got very upset.
But I've shown a couple of examples as you were talking.
Oh, you were?
Yeah. But, I know that you specifically wanted to show.
I drew them in
two
the
examples. But so Bobby asked me to show you a couple of examples, and I don't know the stories behind them. But if you,
should I tell
that was the first one? Yeah. That was the first one.
Okay.
Oh, do you want me to go back? Do you want me to show the other one again?
What?
Do you want me to show that first one again?
Show the first one. I gave Olive and Castor, I gave an Uncle Scrooge kind of character called Uncle Standard Oil, who was a money man, oil baron, and he had a vested interest in a country called Bananistan in the Middle East, which was a great source of oil. And the mad dictator who ran the country wanted all the oil in the world, so he sent his minions out to get all the oil in the world, and they kidnapped the oil family. and brought them to Arabia. And so Popeye had a father. This one is Popeye somehow inherits the yellow submarine, which at the time I thought, what? Oh, sorry. Is this on? Which I thought at the time was a King Features property, so I decided I could use the characters. And which included the Beatles, and I had a sweet tribute to John Lennon where his picture was missing on the wall of the Yellow Submarine because he had died a couple of years before. So they're going through this. They're going through the sea of time here in the Yellow Submarine. Now this one is actually, I'm quite proud of this one because it's actually kind of a lampoon of the process of licensing it in the comics industry. At some point, I noticed as a kid that in the comic books, there's this character that appeared in the comic books who looked like Ludo, but was never called Ludo. He was called, the Sea Hag used to call him Sonny Boy. You know, now my dad explained to me that the Sea Hag was the main villain of the newspaper strip. And also, that Ludo was a character created, Seagar created for the cartoons. And he would appear, you know, in the cartoons every month. Cartoons came out monthly. And because audiences had short memories, they did do basically the same formula over and over again when you fight over olive oil with Ludo. In the newspaper strip, there were these epic adventures that would go on for months, and a new villain would appear almost every time. That was part of the challenge for E.C. Seagar, was to create who was Popeye going to fight next, which monster was he going to fight next. And so he had to do Ludo, put Ludo in the strip. And once Popeye vanquished Ludo in the newspaper strip, he never came back. Okay? And so, in my version, Ludo comes back. After how many years? I don't know, it's been decades. And he sees what's happened to the cartoon that he used to be in. And it's changed so much, it's gone through so many hands, and gone through so many mutations, he doesn't recognize it. And all